on the panel, though, was Brock Council. Brock, if I remember correctly from what you told me back or in the private chat, you do at least lean evolution. So, okay, let's hand it to you. Real brief introduction. And what would you like to discuss in terms of the topic tonight? Evolution is false. Change our minds. We're willing to listen.
Can you hear me? Okay. I was having trouble getting the mic to work, but I guess it's gone now. So as I said, I am leaning evolution, and I also think God is a possibility, just so you know, by the way. I want to know if Kent thinks that evolution is a linear thing, or if it's like a branching pattern with like multiple things coming from one thing. Did he bring up a thing earlier with like a big paper, laminated paper?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's according to the evolutionists that teach in our public schools, which is what I'm concerned about because I'm having to pay for all this. Okay, they have these charts. Here's the chart straight from the textbook, showing all the life forms, plants, insects, animals, all coming from a common ancestor, being a protozoa or a bacteria or a single-celled creature of some kind. I'll just point out this isn't science. We have seen a variety of I think there are 800 varieties of butterflies. Whatever it is. Okay, there's a bunch of butterflies. They might have had a common ancestor called a butterfly. Why would they say that's proof the butterfly is related to the kangaroo? That's not science. So I think all we've ever observed is variations within the same kind, what anybody would consider the same kind, and the variations have limits. Farmers have been trying for years to get cows to give more milk. They now have a cow that gives 280 pounds a day, 34 gallons, utterly insane. But there's a limit. They're never going to get a cow to give 4 trillion tons of milk a day. There is a limit. There's a limit with dogs. You have the Great Dane and the Chihuahua, 44-inch and 4-inch. Why don't they get a dog 7 miles tall? Is there a limit? Yes, there's variations within the dog kind. They're still a dog, and they're limited. This is where the atheists and evolutionists, they either don't understand it or can't admit it. There are variations within the dog kind. Big dog, little dog, I agree. They might have had a common ancestor. Could be the dog, the wolf, and the coyote are related. I don't know. But they're not related to the banana. This is where they go ahead.
I don't think evolutionists think that a dog is going to get 7 miles tall.
I don't either. That's my point. They start with a protozoa or a bacteria. Is there a limit to how big bacteria can get? How did it turn into a whale?
I'm pretty sure.
The whale 80 feet long. How did this bacteria turn to a whale?
I don't really remember.
That's how they teach it. That's my objection. That's not science.
Well, it's not. Do you think the bacteria? Do you think their story is that the bacteria just grew as a big cell, or do you think it's multicellular? Because you believe a whale is multicellular, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. How did
the bacteria become multicellular? That's a whole argument
too. That's a good question. I think there were 3 things somebody mentioned. One is they cell split into 2, but it kind of failed at the last second. Another is they may have evolved sticky goo, however that works. I'm just not remembering clearly. But I did make something, and you said something about the names earlier. You said something like, I don't think it matters how we name them. I think I disagree with that.
Yeah, when it comes to classification systematics, kingdom, phylum, order,
right,
family, genus,
species. Okay. Here's my personal belief. I don't really think that the kingdom, phylum, I don't think that stuff makes sense because, to my knowledge, if evolution is true, there's not like 20 clades. There's trillions upon trillions of clades. If evolution is true and the Earth is old, there's an uncountable amount of clades. There's clades we'll never know about. So I think it's flawed. They have a class. And supposedly birds came from reptiles, so I don't agree with their classification of birds are their own class and reptiles are their own class. But according to them, you can't lose your ancestry. I disagree with them on that, but I do agree that if evolution is true, it would be a branching pattern, and that's what I believe. So just so you know.
Well, sounds like you went to public school and you drank the Kool-Aid.
Well, I don't agree with them on everything. So I don't understand that.
You got to see that movie about drink the Kool-Aid.
I hate the way they name things. I made something in Microsoft Paint. I could show it to you. They like a Tyrannosaurus is either the first Tyrannosaur or its descendants, and nothing else can be a Tyrannosaur. I'm like,
Well, Brock, let me ask you this.
Really define what it is.
If you
What's
were
up?
in an elevator with somebody, an elevator pitch, and they were really on the fence, they were curious, what is true, creation or evolution, universal ancestry or independent origins? And so you only had maybe a minute max, and they wanted to know, Brock, why do you believe in evolution? Why do you believe all life is related through common ancestry? I want to know. I just want to know what the truth is. What evidence would you give them?
I think that, well, when I said evolution, I meant the process. I'm not 100% sure that everything is related. Like, there could have, if abiogenesis is true, they could have made like separate cells and they could have evolved on their own because of the separate process of evolution. But I mean, maybe things are related. Maybe my cousin is literally a chimp. I just don't know. But I'm pretty sure I'm related to Kent. Can we agree on that?
I think we all go back to Adam and Eve. Yes, we're all human. All humans are related that way. But that does not go back to a chimpanzee or to a banana.
If Brock, you mentioned direction of change, okay? Because it doesn't sound like you're confident enough with universal common ancestry to present what you believe is a powerful case or a powerful line of evidence for universal common descent. So earlier you were talking about the direction of change. Is it linear or is it well, I just want to finish. Is it branching pattern? Okay, but the thing is, when we look at the genome, when we look at the claim mechanisms, natural selection and mutations, and Kent has pointed this out many times in his slides on mutations, the direction of change is actually downhill, or we get adaptation, which is horizontal, but we don't actually see these types of vertical changes that are going to take your bacteria to whale. So if the change is largely downhill because most mutations are deleterious, disease causing and damaging, how could you ever put forth scientifically this idea that we've all evolved from single-celled like ancestors billions of years ago?
So again, I'm not 100% sure how something single-celled could become multi-cell. Maybe there was a god that modified itself along the way. Maybe the world is a simulation. I'm not sure, but I think evolution has things to suggest it. But when it comes to what you said, when the mutation goes up, what could you repeat that last part?
Mutations are supposed to add something novel if evolution is true, but the great majority of them are deleterious. They're damaging, they're disease causing, and so they're taking things downhill rather than uphill.
Well, I don't know if that's true. Could you provide a source for me to look into? Because that would change everything.
Absolutely. I know Kent probably has several sources. I've got a whole PowerPoint presentation where world famous population geneticists and biologists admit that the reality is that most mutations are deleterious.
Well, not only that, and I guess why someone's looking for that source, you would also have a burden of proof to provide us with something that suggests that this change can happen. And I'm not aware of any experiments, like any long-term experience, especially like the Linsky's experiment, where we show these things that are beneficial in a very narrow way, but nothing changed. There's been nothing. There's no example, not a single example that's demonstrable from your camp. So why do you believe it?
Well, remember, it's not that I know for sure. If I said I did, I'm sorry, that's a mistake. It's not that I know for sure, but I think people have observed flies speciating, and I think there's even a fly in Antarctica that has no wings, and it's just very small changes. And I think, well, if the Earth is old, I'm not sure if it is.
Okay, hey Brock, let's stop there. I'm going to hand it to Kent. So Brock brought up an example about flies changing or speciating. There is one, I think it's beetles on windy islands. They lost their wings. Could be
one thing. I'm not saying that the flies like turn to a brachiosaurus. I'm just saying the flies may have changed color. They might not be able to interbreed anymore. Stuff like that. Do you believe in that?
Kent, over to you, brother.
But this is where you got to distinguish between what is science and what is religion. It is science is what we can observe, study, and test. Look it up. Definition of science. Things that we can do and observe, we can experiment, do an experiment, we can test it, we can show it happening. I think every farmer in the history of the world will tell you their cows produce cows. Always, only cows, never anything else. Dogs always produce dogs. Now man can intervene and try to select to get bigger dog or smaller dog or dumber dog, like my wife's Pugly, but they're still a dog. Nature can select. If you turn all the dogs in the world loose in Alaska, come back in 5 years, only the dogs with thick fur, like a wolf or something like that, would survive. It didn't create the thick fur.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is the part where I don't think I agree with the evolutionists on everything. This is so to an evolutionist, if my ancestor was a dog, I would be a dog. Nothing could change that unless you modify my genes, and then I don't know. But if I were to give birth to someone or whatever, they'd be a dog, and then their child would be a dog, and it keeps going for all eternity or whenever the world ends, whatever. I think we should try to redefine things, but I'm literally just a one-man army on that. Nobody really seems to agree with me. So, but yeah, I just think that according to them, it'd still be a dog.
Okay, let's give Kent the final word, and then we're going to move on to a new guest. Go ahead, Kent. You get the last word.
All of the different varieties of animals we see in the world, whether it's kangaroos or dogs or humans or anything, all of them can produce a variety of offspring. One human couple could have 19 kids, like Jim Bob Duggar, a friend of mine, and they're probably all different. They're still human. There's still a lot of similarities, and the differences are within limits. They might get one with blonde hair, brown hair, red hair, but they're not going to get one with purple hair. Okay. They might get one that's, 5 feet tall, one that's 6 feet tall, but they're not going to get one that's 80 feet tall. It's just not going to happen. There are limits within the genetic code. And
I agree that we're not going to get 80 feet tall. I really do agree with that. We're not going to get someone 80 feet tall. They die before they even grow that big.
Well, how do we get an 80-foot whale out of an amoeba? They have 80-foot whales.
Doesn't water support weights? And doesn't the whale have? Okay. This is So if the person was to get if my descendants were to evolve to get that big, well, they have to change so much. I don't know if they still be human. According to evolutionists, they would be because of cladistic technology, however you call it. But to me, I'm not really sure if I call it a human. If I have to be on 4 legs, whatever, and be a monstrosity. So I think I should clarify it. Does it?
Okay. Nobody in the history of the world has ever seen a human produce a non-human. All the mutations that we've seen are harmful, fatal, or useless. We got some ducks down here in our lake. We feed them every day when the kids come take tours of our dinosaur adventureland. The 2 of our ducks have a mutation where the bones of their head did not grow together right, and so a group of feathers grows off of one side. A mohawk hairdo. Okay, that's completely useless. It's not beneficial. And that type of, I don't know of any mutations that add any new information that's going to change a duck into an alligator or anything else. It just doesn't, it's not science. That's my whole point. They can believe this, and this actually might someday be proven to be true in their mind. But until then, it's not science. Science.
Brock, I got to cut you off. We've given you more than enough time.
I promise you this.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
But you can stick around, and we'll have more opportunity for you later. But we do got to be structured here in terms of the guests. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next person, Albert. So Albert, appreciate the brief introduction earlier. And so tonight's discussion, evolution is false. Change our minds. We're willing to listen. We're looking for evidence for that kind of evolution that says whales and banana plants, or Sam over there, he's a human being, in case you didn't know. Behind him, there's a cow. And so evolution is
Sam.
Yeah, that's Sam.
That's the cow.
What's the cow's name, Sam?
It could be. But I'm Sam the human.
So Sam the human and the cow apparently are related through common ancestry. So Albert, feel free to present a point of discussion. Go ahead.
That's right. I'm Albert. I'm actually a banana. That's right. Okay. So in general, I'm against referring to models as fact. I think that's bad because it introduces dogma into science, which is really bad because it crosses the religion science boundary, which I agree with. Second thing is, as an example, for example, the Big Bang, referring that as a fact, I think is unscientific and wrong. You can refer to it as a model or best available physical model. I think these kind of names are appropriate, but calling it fact, I think is wrong. With regards to evolution or macroevolution, the general thing I find is that the model states that things happen over long periods of time, but we don't have simulations to compute such events over these kind of long periods of time. So we're kind of left in the dark as if macroevolution really does or does not occur over these long periods of time. So how do you, Dr. Kent, address these kind of long time period issues with regards to these kind of models?
Sure. Well, that is clear evidence given right there on the face that it's not observable. We can't see it happen. Therefore, it's not part of science. It's part of a belief. They believe if we had billions of years, okay, They've been trying and trying for centuries to run faster. They now have people running the 100-yard dash in what, 9 seconds or whatever it is. Okay. Do you think anybody will ever run the 100-yard dash in 1 second? No, there's a limit. Have they reached the limit? I don't know. People always try to break records, but now they're not breaking them by very much, you know. But I think there's a limit to how much a man can lift. Whatever the world's record is for deadlift, I don't know, but there's a limit. They're not going to lift 40 trillion tons. I know that. So this is what the evolutionists don't understand. More time is not going to help. When you've reached the limit, you've reached the limit. And so you can believe and imagine, SpongeBob style, that maybe if we had billions of years, stop. That's outside of science. That's my point. I love science. I taught high school science 15 years. I love science. Evolution is not part of science. It's imagination. So
okay.
It's not. So if we had a long period of time, right there, you shot yourself in the foot or shot them in the foot. You just showed it's not observable. Therefore, it's not science.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll build off that point.
Hold on for a second. I want to,
Sure.
I want to ask you. You made a distinction or a bifurcation between religion and science. Can you explain that?
No. What I meant is dogma. So, for example,
you said there was a religion and science boundary that was being crossed or potentially being crossed.
Yeah, I said
what is that boundary?
Yes, I said that if the scientist asserts a particular model is as fact, they're asserting it as fact, as in, for example, man is created in the image of God. This is sort of a factual dogma from a religious perspective. But since when they call their models fact, they're elevating it to that sort of level. That's what I'm trying to say.
But you understand that God or not God is a true dichotomy. So not God would also be religious dogma.
Yeah, I do agree that the atheist position of there is no God is inherently a religious claim. I do agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're just saying that there's competing worldviews, and that's all. But to say that it's a dilemma would be a false dilemma. And that would just be arbitrary. You'd just be saying that you have an opinion and you don't like that theists do science.
Well, hang on. Let me throw in one thing here for Albert. Albert, this is the European Space Agency. They said time, space, and matter all began with the Big Bang. Is that science or is that dogma?
I don't think they worded that very nicely. So I think it's closer to dogma.
Okay.
Yeah.
It says, in a fraction of a second, the universe grew from smaller than a single atom to bigger than a galaxy. Is that science or religious dogma?
If I was their editor, I would say they should rewrite it as our best models show that, and then that statement. But I wouldn't put it like that. I think that's dogma.
They don't do that. I collect public school textbooks. I love debating these guys, and they say this happened. The Big Bang happened 14.7 billion years ago, 13.772. That's not science. That's dogma. They should say some scientists believe A, B, C. But if you're going to give what some scientists believe in public school, then let's teach all the beliefs. Why don't they all the different religions? They don't. They got one religion that they push, and that's it.
Yeah, there's been competing Big Bang models. There's a steady state model. There's a boom and crunch model. Now, I don't know how successful they are, but they speak of it as the Big Bang is like the only one or the fact, but it's not. It's not really. It just they have a couple observations, like a microwave background, a space expansion, and then from those they backtrack all the way to say, okay, therefore there's a Big Bang. So yeah, I agree with you.
Would you include? We should say the creation model should be there. Maybe a God outside of our time, space, matter created all this. Is that a reasonable model? As reasonable as the Big Bang?
That's a tough one because if I'm trying to assert a cause only using physical evidence, I don't think I can use God as physical evidence. I don't know how I would do that.
All right, Albert?
Yes.
I'm holding a pencil here.
Sure thing.
If I told you, I want you to explain how this pencil came to be, but you cannot use man as your answer. That is excluded. You have to get a natural way the pencil could form. Right away, I've excluded the only logical answer. Somebody had to design this.
Okay, yeah, sure thing.
I said you cannot use man, well then there's no answer. If you cannot use God for how the universe got here, well then I think you're stuck right there on square one.
Well,
yeah, Albert,
yes.
Albert, you've contradicted yourself because you've just put forth naturalistic dogma.
Well,
unless you have an argument to exclude a supernaturalistic interpretation, now you're putting forth your own dogma. So the contradiction is that you're arguing against dogma, but at the same time you're arguing for naturalistic dogma, and that's a problem. So
let me ask you one question, and you can answer. Albert, if you're walking through the woods and you find an arrowhead,
Yes.
what would you conclude right away? That it's a natural object, or that some intelligent design created it?
Generally, it'd be some artifact. Yeah, human origin artifact. Yeah.
Whether you find the guy or not, you're probably never going to find who made it. Okay, but you know somebody made it. When you look at a single cell in your body, you ought to just marvel and say, "Wow, somebody had to make this." But evolution religious believers are so anxious to get rid of God as an answer. They want to exclude. Nobody made this pencil. We can't have man as an answer. They're stuck already. There had to be a God. I'm sorry, there has to be, whether you like it or not.
So in response to both your points, why can't it be a both and? So for example, a scientist can characterize the physical mechanisms that lead to things happening, but also the belief in a creator God can be true as well. So both things can't be like, so let me rephrase that. Can it be a both and? As in there is a creator, but the creator has some mechanisms in which all of reality forms.
Okay, I think the creator has a mechanism where he gave each of the different kinds of animals the ability to produce a variety of babies. Some of the babies can stand cold weather better, and some of the babies can stand hot weather better. And those that can stand the hot weather better, like say the dingo, they're more comfortable in the desert region. They wouldn't survive in the cold region. Now, still a dog, and they're technically still interfertile. Dogs and wolves can interbreed, but they're able to adapt to their environment within limits. They can adapt to the Sahara Desert at 120 degrees, but they're never going to adapt to 10,000 degrees. Okay, they're never going to do that. So the variations have limits. This is what they don't get. I believe God gave all the plants and animals an amazing gene code that is able to produce a variation so they'll survive in different environments. That's all. It's
Albert,
designed that way.
Was your question for Kent, was your question that can a God use naturalistic mechanisms to create? Was that your question?
In some sense, yes. Essentially, the scientist studies the natural mechanism. So why can't we have both positions simultaneously? There is a creator God, but there is natural mechanisms from said creative God, and so we study those mechanisms. Yes.
Right, and those mechanisms show us that yes, variations happen. My Chevy van, you may not believe this, has a heater and an air conditioner. Why would they put both in the same vehicle? Well, they don't know if it's going to hot climate or cold climate, so they put them both in there. God gave I think the mechanism the designer gave of every plant and animal is the ability to produce a variety within limits, but still a variety. My Chevy van does not have a blast furnace. Okay, I can't melt steel with it, but I can keep warm. Okay, and so I think God gave all the plants and animals. I think it's amazing design. And so yes, I think you could believe in a designer and believe that he created mechanisms, but they won't admit at that. Then they're going to go one step further and say those mechanisms have no limits. That's where they go nuts.
Right.
Yeah.
It goes back to what we were saying earlier with Brock. The mechanisms, natural selection, and mutations are not creating anything novel and meaningful. Mutations take things downhill. And as Kent pointed out earlier, he had a slide that natural selection is not a creative mechanism. It's just a fine-tuning mechanism that keeps a species as strong as it can be. So there's your two main mechanisms to take your fish to fishermen, and they don't work.
Yo, can I go?
Well,
Can
one
you hear me?
last thing.
Oh, no, we're going to go one at a time. I do appreciate you being here, Ken Rock. So we got Albert. Let's give you one more question or point. We'll have Kent respond. Then we'll bring in the next person.
Just on that,
Sam, you wanted
last
to say
point,
something.
really quick though,
Sure.
Albert. Yeah, you can believe that, but what would follow would be that naturalism is false, and therefore atheism is also false.
Can you give me a definition for naturalism, because I'm not familiar exactly with the term?
Naturalism would just be a rigidly naturalistic interpretation of the physical world, excluding the supernatural.
Okay.
Or what you might say anti-supernaturalism.
Okay, got it.
Type of naturalism. Yeah.
Okay, so
it goes back to naturalism. Nobody made this pencil. Explain how it got here.
Yeah.
That's naturalism.
Yeah.
There is no naturalistic explanation for a pencil or an arrowhead. There is no naturalistic. It has to be somebody outside of the arrowhead.
Yeah, if you exclude humans from the, yes, if you say without a human, how do you make a pencil? Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, we would say if we're referring to God being the creator, we would be referring to God in that sense as a mind. And so the analogy that Kent is using is that a mind created the pencil in the same way that the mind created the physical world, although he may have used physical mechanisms to do so, like you suggested or asked anyway. But yeah, that would be the mind of God.
Yeah, I heard an interesting quote. It's like before there was time, space, matter, there was a mind, or there was information. Like what was there before? And yeah, I understand that. A question for both of you. So what would be your best argument against macro evolution being one of God's mechanisms?
Go ahead, Kent.
It's never observed. It's never been seen. Nobody's ever seen any plant or animal change to something that anybody would consider a different kind. So I don't need to explain why God couldn't do it. We couldn't do what? It doesn't happen.
So your primary objection is not a theological objection, but an evidence-based objection for macroevolution.
Well, I'd have a theological explanation, objection also. Okay, but certainly there's no scientific explanation. There's no evidence.
And not only that, Ken, you made a good point. Theologically, what does the Bible say in Genesis? Genesis claims to be the history book of the universe. He created two people, Adam and Eve, Adam from the dust of the ground, Eve from his rib. And there's no hint of large-scale evolution. There's no hint that humans are related to chimpanzees and any other life form for that matter. But that's what macroevolution would suggest, that all life is related through common ancestry. So the Bible contradicts that.
Yeah, it'd take me a really long time to parse through each verse of Genesis and go through it one by one to see exactly how much it contradicts. But yeah, okay, I generally agree. I think I took up enough time. Thanks for having me.
It doesn't contradict anything scientific. It doesn't contradict itself. It might contradict somebody's worldview,
right?
But it doesn't. There's no contradictions in Genesis.
Yeah, I was reading it recently. I was very impressed exactly how kind of logical the step-by-step is. It's like humans are made at the end, which is kind of what scientists think. Humans came later, and then even the sequence of animals is reasonable according to the scientific. I'm basing it off the scientific position, but it's it's very logical the way it's laid out. So
I wouldn't say that it's the scientific position. Well, it might be the scientific belief currently in mainstream science that humans evolved last, but I think Sam and Kent and I would all agree that that's not true science. It's not empirical science, just because scientists believe it. Kent?
Right. There's a lot of things mixed in with science these days, a lot of religion mixed in with the science book. Beer is quite often sold at football games. Beer has nothing to do with football, and you don't become more athletic by drinking beer. So the fact that something is thoroughly mixed in with football does not make it part of a sport, okay? The fact that evolution is thoroughly mixed in our textbooks does not make evolution part of science. Science is things we can observe, study, test. I love science. I taught physical science, earth science, biology. I love science. There's nothing about evolution necessary. You can teach the kids all the biology. Okay, boys and girls, these are the flexors, the extenders, the radius, the ulna, the humerus, the biceps, triceps, deltoid. No doctor on the planet who thinks about evolution when he's doing surgery. He better know his anatomy. Okay, evolution even if it's true, it's a useless theory. There's no use to it at all.
Okay, well, Albert, feel free to stick around. We're going to move around the room for now, but feel free to stick around. Hopefully, we'll engage
so much.
Some more.
Thanks for taking me.
Thank you, Albert. Okay, next up is ARE or Andrew. Andrew, good to have you as always. One of our favorite critics, of course. One day you'll agree with us. I'm confident that. So, Andrew, what's going on tonight, and what would you like to discuss?
Yeah, is my audio coming in so good so far?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, actually, your audio sounds like it's evolved from the last few times.
Oh yeah, I got a new laptop.
Accidentally evolved. Yeah.
Good to hear.
Real
quick before I ask Kent a few questions. I was wondering what was hold on, is that this post in the chat? No. I was just wondering what the author's name that Brian just brought up was, just so I can look into that.
Lee Spetner. He wrote a couple books.
Okay.
I've got one of his newer ones behind me. I think it's called The Evolution Revolution. And then his other book is Not by Chance. That's an older one, but a really good one.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I've never heard of him, so I'll have to look at his work. So I guess kind of a few things I want to talk about. One of the things I heard tonight was the argument about nested hierarchies and all that, and of course that's a big thing with me, as you know, Donny. So I hear this argument from you that the reason we have similarities with other organisms is because they need to be similar for us to consume them. Do I have that right?
Actually, and Kent, if you could hold your thought, Brother Kent, I just want to be really strict on who joins since we're doing this live. I don't want any trolls joining. The two people that just entered the room, and then Kent will have you engage Andrew. Donzo, can you give us a real brief introduction in terms of who you are and what your position is?
Yeah, no problem. You can just call me Donzo. I accept that evolution is true, and I'm really just here to, if I could, discuss some misconceptions and try to bridge the gap between some of the logic on each side.
Okay, Donzo, appreciate that. We'll keep you on the panel. Very good. And then General Zonfer. I did see you on webcam backstage, so I know you're legit. Can you just tell us what the position you hold to is here tonight, and then just make sure to hit unmute if you can, please.
Yeah, no worries about that, Donny. Thanks for having me on. So I am on the pro-evolution side. I studied a good deal on the topic, but my question to Kent when I get the opportunity...
I'll just stop you there, General. Right now we have Andrew, but I just wanted to make sure the two new panelists were serious about the discussion. So I appreciate that. General Zonfer and Donzo will keep you here on the main panel, and we'll throw it back to Kent and Andrew. Gentlemen, I appreciate your patience there. Kent, you were just about to respond.
Yeah, Andrew's question of his statement that I believe the similarities is only so we can consume each other. That is absolutely not true. That is one factor involved. I think we all have to live on the same planet. We all have to live in the same temperature range. We have to eat the same foods ourselves. So I think there's a whole symbiotic relationship. So also that we all have to experience the same things. I think there are similarities because we all have to experience the same amount of gravitational pull on us. We all have friction, air friction. We have to.
How would that affect?
There's a lot of
DNA similarities, though, at the DNA level. Like how would gravity affect
the
that?
DNA?
Hold on. Just real point of moderation. Andrew, you'll get plenty of time to talk, but we'll just let Kent finish his thought real quick.
The DNA is the code to build every life form that we know of. It's an incredibly complex code. If there are similarities in the DNA, we have the same things we need to do. Like the robot example, the robot has to flex its fingers. So does the chimpanzee, so does the human, So do a lot of animals have to flex their finger. I think there's probably lots of similar lines of code to tell the muscles when to contract, to tell the brain what signal to give. It's an extremely complex system setup. To believe it happened by chance and nobody designed it would be real silly, in my humble opinion. So if there are similarities in the code, and I think that there are, as best we can read that code, then that does still not prove a common relationship. It could just as easily be the same guy wrote the code. That's all. I think I could look at all my thousands of books in my library here. All of them, except maybe a couple, use the same code, 26 letters from the English alphabet. Does that prove they're related? No, that's the code with which you write English. So the code that we have, the CATG, is amazing how it can create all these different things. It's a design code. Just like the English alphabet is a code to write, and you can say a lot of different things in English. You can write an infinite number of books, but that's the code with which you write English. There's another code for Chinese, another code for Japanese. So the DNA code is similar in different animals because the same guy wrote the code. That's my point.
Well, you are aware, though, that similar genotypes can produce similar phenotypes, but it isn't always a linear relationship like that. So you can have similar phenotypes due to different, sometimes very different genotypes. So it isn't necessarily the case that the phenotype, the observable characteristics of an organism, which is what you're talking about, is responding to the environment and all the environmental conditions.
Can you give a specific example? Pick an
Well,
animal or plant.
Well, there's the redundancy of the genetic code, for example. So you can have similar nuclear. So you know what codons are, right?
What, protons?
What codons?
Protons. I forget. It's been too long since I read that. I have
No,
to look it up.
codons. Codons. Sorry. Not
Codons.
protons.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Remind me. It's been years. That's not the type of stuff I deal with every day.
Okay. So a codon is a free letter
Section of the DNA code.
Right. So you have in the genetic code, you have a few different codons that can code for the same amino acid. The amino acids fold up to form the proteins, and the proteins interact with one another to form the phenotype, the observable characteristics. In a nutshell, that's what happens. So it isn't necessarily the case that because there are similar environmental conditions that would possibly result in similar observable physical characteristics in the organisms that we see. Therefore, they must have the same underlying nucleotide sequence. So your argument doesn't follow.
You're not making a point here. I don't think the fact that these codons are similar in different creatures could be part of the same design code. Again, whether they use them for the same thing or not, that's amazing. You can use the letter A to make thousands of different kinds of words. Just with
Well, I'm responding to a specific point you were making, that they were similar because of similar environmental conditions, that we all live on the same world, so on and so forth.
You're again selecting one of the many arguments I gave. Okay, they're similar because, well, I said there's several reasons why they're similar. We have the same environmental conditions to handle. We have the same things we have to do, pick up things, move, etc. And I think the obvious conclusion from all the complexity we see in all these codes, that somebody had to write it. Nobody, if I said ink got splattered on this page and made this song, you'd think I was insane. It's nothing but ink on paper. Oh no, it's much more than ink on paper. It's carrying information. Where's the information in the DNA code? It's not just, not just these molecules and atoms interacting with each other. It's carrying a code. The ink on the paper in these books is not just ink on paper. It's carrying a code. And the DNA is carrying an incredible amount of code. How can you not see somebody had to write that? You really think it happened by chance? Splattered the ink on paper and made a book?
Oh, I don't think it happened by chance, but that's beside the point.
And Andrew, let me just give one quick point of contribution, and feel free to respond.
Donny, could you give more than a quick one so I can take time to run over and go potty? I've had a long day.
Yes, brother.
I'll be right back. Give a long one.
Okay. So, and Sam, you can feel free to get your response too. So, as you know, Andrew, the third position codon variation that you speak to, and I appreciate it, it's a fair point. We now understand that it's not just redundant, as in it tolerates error in the cell. The cell actually used different redundant elements to slow and speed processes in the cell. And so there's a lot of information compression into each single nucleotide in the genome, really. And so we have secondary functions there that can help us understand why there are hierarchical patterns in redundant elements. Andrew, feel free to respond.
Well, that affects the speed of translation, sure, and possibly expression levels, but that doesn't necessarily change the actual physical shape of the protein. We don't have evidence for that based on herd codon positions. So sure, it could affect the phenotypes in some ways, but that doesn't affect the protein shape and necessarily why all of the proteins in the body of an organism, or the collective proteome, let's just say, are all correlated with one another in terms of this nested hierarchical pattern.
Why does it have to affect the collective proteome?
Well, because, like I said, because they're all correlated with each other in this nested hierarchy. So you need to explain that pattern.
Right. Well, that's because right. That's because the fact that third position codon variation helps us slow and speed cell processes. Cell processes are going to be different depending on what kind or what animal you're looking at. And so that secondary function can be specific to that creature and that creature's specific phenotype,
for
physical
many of the
characteristics,
organisms
how it works.
Sorry, for many of the organisms we've studied, like bacteria in the lab, for example, sure, that does have a major effect because their effective population sizes are so large. But in things like vertebrates, like humans, for example, or just mammals in general, etc., their effective populations are so small, relatively speaking, that selection for that codon variation isn't very large. It's actually very weak. So that doesn't really explain why.
Selection, you're saying selection is very weak for those specific code, the third position codons?
For this codon usage bias you're talking about, yeah, in things like vertebrates, like obviously comparing the population size of E. coli in the wild compared
So
to
are
the
you saying that
population
the function, the secondary function's not there because selection's weak, or that the function's not important enough to make any real difference in the hierarchies?
I mean, it could be there, but we don't have experimental evidence for that in things like humans, for example, like maybe for certain very essential genes, but not for all
Well, we
of
do.
them.
Well, and then I'll hand it back to Kent because he's back, and then we feel free to hold off, Andrew. Sam, feel free to take your bathroom break too. But I could show you, and I think you're familiar with it, at least one paper on translational pausing that does show the existence and reality of these multiple functions in third position codon. And so cell processes are going to be different. They're going to be distinct if you're looking at a human or a chimp or a dog or a whale. And so there is going to be a significant of an effect there to explain the hierarchies that you have an issue with. Because the secondary function applies uniquely to the creature that spans that hierarchy. But I do want to, I'll give you a chance to respond, but hold off on that because I do want to hand it back to Kent, as Kent's got about 20 more minutes with us. So Kent, hope you're refreshed, brother. And any thoughts in general on this argument from a hierarchy?
Well, I heard Andrew say a minute ago that we don't have experimental evidence, blah, blah, blah. We don't have experimental evidence for any of these things on this chart. We have observational evidence that cows produce cows. We do not have any observation or experimental evidence that cows came from a protozoa or bacteria. Why are we teaching this to the kids as part of science? This isn't science. Why is this in our textbooks? How did this one religion get preferential treatment above all other religions? So I think you're right that we don't have experimental evidence for things happening, then we should be cautious. We don't have observational evidence for any of the claims of evolution. Life coming from non-life, where's the evidence for that? Matter coming from nothing, where's the evidence for that? This is stuff we're teaching. One life form turning into an obviously different kind of form. They've got a bacteria turning into a whale and a human. That's not science. Why? Tell me, Andrew, why do you think we should teach this stuff in school when it's not observable, but we can't experiment on it? We don't see it happening. Why is it? Why do you consider?
Therein lies the crux of it. What is an observation in science? So tell me, can you define what an observation in science means?
Well, we can observe the definition of science. I'll look it up for you right here.
I didn't ask what the definition of science is. I asked what the definition of observation is.
Somebody can see it, to observe.
No, that's not the definition of observation in science.
Oh, here we go. Defining words. Let's see. Preferred gender and all that
stuff.
If
you don't know what definitions are, then the terms.
Science is knowledge gained from using radio waves.
In that,
hey, hold on, Andrew. We're not doing like little mini quizzes here. Like if you want to engage with Kent on a line of questioning or something like that, you're
that's what I'm doing.
But let's not over talk each other.
Okay. We can observe the effects of radio waves. Nobody's ever observed a radio wave. We can observe the effects of gravity. We can observe the effects of a lot of things. But this is where you get science is limited to what we can observe, study, test, and demonstrate. We don't observe any animal produce a different kind. They try
to get
dogs. They try to get varieties of dogs. And they've got 339 breeds of recognized dogs by the American Kennel Association. and they're still dog. They've never been able to get out of what any 4-year-old would call a dog. But do you believe the dogs are related to bananas and should have a chart like this? This has dogs and bananas related. Do you believe that's science?
Yes, and I say that because we can observe the effects of that, as you just said. We don't have to observe the event happen right before our eyes.
So what is the effect that makes you think dogs and bananas came from a common ancestor?
Well, some of the things that you guys have been talking about, similar pseudogenes, for example, nested hierarchy patterns, like you can say there was a common designer for that, but that's not really an explanation for the patterns, the specific similarities and differences we see. I could just as easily propose any supernatural explanation in place of that, and it would still have the same predictive power. It doesn't necessarily have to be a common designer or a common god. So the explanation is pretty much useless.
I will predict that if you go talk to any farmer in the planet and ask them, have your cows ever produced anything other than a cow or come from anything other than a cow? I predict, without meeting all the farmers in the world, they will all say cows always make cows. That's all we've ever observed in human history. Now, if you wish to imagine SpongeBob style, well, you believe, apparently, that the cow is related to the penguin and the sunflower. Do you believe cows and sunflowers are related, like this chart shows?
Yes.
Why do you believe such a thing?
Because of the evidence that
Andrew, let's say I'm gonna pose you the same question that I posed. I think it was Brock. Let's say you're in an elevator with just a lay person. They're on the fence. They want to know what's true. Creation or evolution, universal or separate ancestry.
Sure.
You've only got a minute or two, depending on how big the building is, what floor they're going to. So what evidence would you provide them? I highly doubt that your average person is going to understand, comprehend, or take seriously this argument from third position codon variation and hierarchies and redundant elements. Like, this is a lay person here. They want to know why evolution is true. What line of evidence would you give them?
Okay. Well, I guess off the top of my head, one thing would be the similarities we see among cytochrome C proteins among all organisms, among other similar proteins. So you don't even have to look at, like you said, the third codon positions there. You can just look at the amino acid sequence, and the fact that all these organisms have these similar proteins that we know do similar functions, and yet they still have this variation that doesn't seem to affect their function. That's shared in common with them seems to speak common ancestry.
Okay, so similar proteins that form a hierarchy in the biological world?
Yes.
Okay. Kent, what are your thoughts on that? Line of evidence for common descent, similar proteins that form a hierarchy.
He is correct that as far as we know, there are many similar proteins in many different life forms. Then he comes to the wild conclusion that this proves relationship, where anybody else could say, no, that proves same designer. I think you'll find nearly all the bolts and nuts on a Ford and a Chevy and a Dodge all are right-handed, threaded to the, and that proves they all came from a mosquito. I mean, by his logic, we see similarities, therefore they're related. That's not logic. Similarities are just as much evidence of a common.
Humans.
You have chosen to believe that prove a common ancestor because you don't want to believe God created you, because then God might have some rules that might rule your life. That's the real reason. I'd bet $5 on that.
Do you agree that we see similarities between humans?
Oh, yeah. I think probably all the humans had a common ancestor called Adam and Eve.
How do you know they had a common ancestor?
Pardon me?
How do you know humans had a common ancestor?
Oh, it'd be a belief. All I can take is what I observe. I've only observed 71 years of this life on this planet, and I've only observed humans make baby humans. That's all we've ever observed. Somebody wishes to believe otherwise, okay, that's fine, but they should call it a religion and admit it's a religion. You don't know that you're related to a sunflower. You believe you're related to a sunflower because certain lines of evidence have caused you to believe that. Okay? But you don't know that. It's not something you can know scientifically. It's not part of science and knowledge. That's not observable. It's something you've chosen to believe because you're running from God.
Observation doesn't mean seeing things happen with your eyes necessarily.
The definition of science is
I
there it
didn't
is right
say
here.
the definition of science, Kent. I said the definition of observation.
Oh, you're Bill Clinton. What's the definition of is? Yeah, I remember that one too. Okay.
Yeah, but Andrew, what you're doing, Andrew, is you're confusing some observable fact with something that's been rationalized to. So what you're doing is you're conflating two separate things right there. Just because you see the effect of something, the extrapolation back to the cause, that's going to be like a philosophical explanation. And you said, well, anybody could posit any old thing like God or whatever it might be. But that's exactly what you're doing. You're positing time and you're positing naturalism. So you've done
we make
nothing
predictions
different.
from there, and we go test them.
Yeah, but you've done nothing different. So you're just saying that you have a model.
Is go test them.
A model that makes predictions that we go test.
Okay, I said go test them. Sam, right behind you is a cow. Ask that farmer if his cows make baby cows. We got a cow on the North 40 that's pregnant. I'd bet $5 is going to have a calf. Nothing else. Promise. That's testable. The tests we've observed for all of human history say evolution doesn't happen. You guys are supposed to call in and change my mind. My mind is, I think
it's supposed to be
evolution
novel
is
predictions, Kent, that you're testing. Not something
reliable.
we already know happens.
I predict cows will always make baby cows, and they always did come from cows.
Novel predictions because we'd see it happening.
Okay, let me ask a clarifying question. Andrew, do you believe moving forward in time that cows will always produce cows?
Yes, according to their synapomorphies that they already have.
Okay, going back in time, have cows always produced cows?
No, but we have artiodactyls produce cows, and so on and so forth down the hierarchy.
So cows produce cows going forward, but if to reiterate what you just said, going backwards, cows haven't always produced cows, but artiodactyls produce cows.
So let's think about like this. So you have a cow. Let's just simplify it down to the extreme level. Let's just say the quality of being a cow is defined by property X. Okay. So you have something that isn't a cow by that property because it doesn't have that property yet. It doesn't have X yet. According to the evolutionary model, you have an ancestor that then evolved property X. So now it is a cow, according to that cladistic definition.
I understand the evolutionary story that the law of monophyly, creatures are going to produce after the kind, but they're going to add traits to their ancestry.
Right.
Kent,
Exactly.
what are your thoughts on that, brother?
All he's doing is telling a story. This is fairy tale world. This is SpongeBob. He imagines that if we could go back and you could add this property, something that's observable is what I want to hear. This isn't observable. This is a fairy tale you're telling. You believe it happened. And I told you, I think I know why you believe that or want to believe that. But this is not part of science. It's not observable. It's not really, it's a religious belief. So you're welcome to it. Keep your religion. I don't care what religion you have. But don't make me pay to teach that to the kids in public school. You go start a private school and teach it. Anybody dumb enough to come learn it.
Well, I know people want to do that, Ken, but I'm not.
But Andrew, if you're saying that these animals will produce after their kind, but they're adding traits over time, but still in the same ancestry, basically, going back long ago, didn't all we have was single-celled like ancestors, bacteria on the planet?
Well, not bacteria. We just had the category life at that point.
But single-celled like ancestors?
Yes, life.
But today we've got whales, cows, banana plants, humans.
Right, which are still living things, correct? So they're still in that category.
So how many traits had to be added to that single-celled creature to turn it into a human or a whale?
Not necessarily like adding new bones or new traits or structures like that. It's just a character change.
So do you think it was a simple character change for the amoeba or the single-celled creature?
From one character state to another. So like having legs to having not legs. You didn't gain not legs in that case. It was a character change.
Well, I agree we lose things. Now that we agree on, but we don't gain things. You're claiming this bacteria or we'll call it a bacteria, okay? A single-celled creature gained legs and lungs and arms and eyes and ears.
Sure.
So once this bacteria became multicellular, it could gain legs and arms and eyes and hair and ears. Each one of those there's 11 systems in the human body. They're all really complex. and this single-celled creature somehow gained all of that. Where is the evidence for what this fairy tale you're telling us? I want to see it. Where's the
Well,
evidence?
if you look at what we think are the closest living relatives of the kingdom Animalia, Coenoflagellates. So let's just put out evolution for a moment. Let's just say we hypothesize that Coenoflagellates are the closest living relatives of all other animals. They're sister to animals. Okay, we're not even saying evolution is true at this point. We're just forming a hypothesis. We'll say, okay, if that's true, if this hypothesis is correct, we should predict that similar proteins in animals, for example, should already be present in these Coenoflagellates, these earlier ancestors, so that they didn't really have to evolve brand new at that point. They were already present and were modified since that point. And that's what we see. A lot of the collagen in animals, for example, and a lot of the signaling proteins that you're talking about forming these organs when a baby is growing, for example, those are already present in some of the single-celled relatives of animals that we predict.
So a single-celled creature had gave a signal to start growing legs because the single-celled baby growing in the fertilized zygote. Well, where's the evidence for this? You're doing nothing but telling a story.
Genes. You've sequenced their genes. They have these proteins already in place.
Now, it's true. I could see that the lug nuts on a Chevy will fit the lug nuts on a Ford. That's proof they evolve from each other. That's the logic you're doing. Because we have these similarities.
When did I say proof there? I said predictions.
So, but do you call that part of science, or is that a religious belief you have?
No, proof is not part of science. It's a mathematical concept.
Okay. Do you believe we should teach all the kids that the cow and the sunflower are related because of the evidence you just gave? Is this logical to teach this in a public school textbook as science? The cow and the sunflower came from a protozoa. This one uses protozoa. Some use bacteria.
Well,
Some use
come from
amoeba.
protozoa. Protozoa is a specific taxon, but they came from an earlier ancestor, sure.
Right, and the ancestor of the cow was a cow. God created cows, and they've been producing cows ever since. God made sunflowers, and there's now, 70 different kinds of sunflowers that man has classified 70 different kinds. Probably had a common ancestor called a sunflower. That did not prove sunflower cows are related. Andrew.
So I think we're going in circles here, so I want to get to
hold on for a second. Andrew,
Sure.
Andrew, to be fair, we're going to give you a last statement. We do have people that have been patiently waiting, and we've given you more time because you always have more sophisticated arguments. So go ahead and take your last words, and then because Kent is our guest, we'll give Kent the last response to your final statement, and then we're going to move on to Donzo.
Yeah, so I'll leave with this one question for you, Kent. If you're saying evolution is a religion, and I think you would agree creationism is a religion, so according to you, we should teach all these religions in public schools. Are you okay then with teaching that, say, Vishnu created the world in public schools as part of the science classroom?
I would back up further and say, should we have public schools at all? If we're going to have them, then the parents should decide.
In schools in general, let's just say.
Yeah.
Whatever schools you.
What you're doing is trying to slide around the obvious fact. We are teaching one religion. We are right now. Evolution is the only religion being taught.
I'm asking a hypothetical here.
Okay. So hypothetically, you're saying if we include Christianity, should we include these other ones? And if somebody says no, then let's leave it as is. Then you're saying, let's leave it as is. Let's only teach my religion.
No, that's
right
not
now,
what
we have your religion. We have your religion being taught at taxpayer expense. And I'm saying, should we have public schools at all? Why do they include origins? Origins doesn't matter. Teach physics, teach earth science, teach biology. Evolution has nothing to do with any of those. Nothing. You don't need to know anything about evolution to learn the muscles and the bones and how they grow and how the cells reproduce.
Thanks for your contribution, Andrew. I just want to remind you that Kent is going to get the final say because he's our guest here. So that was your last question. I think Kent answered. Kent, are you done?